I was here last year working with Alphonse, who is a dear friend and colleague over many years, talking about the rights of musicians and the rights of musicians to be free and to express their craft, their art and their music freely in the world in which we live. Joining me on the panel to talk about this important subject of whether education is a right, a possibility or a privilege, we could stop right here. It's a right, full stop. Thank you. Good night. So, I know you'll welcome, she has come a long way from Kenya and she's wearing her traditional dress, which is absolutely beautiful. She's also a very beautiful person, but don't tell her I told you that. Emily Akuno, please. And joining, we go well together, do you not think? Joining us, Roger Gifford, Sir Roger Gifford. He was worried. He was very worried before we came out. He said, should I keep my tie on or off? Because people might think I'm a banker. I said, Roger, you are a banker. It's okay. So I'm going to allow Emily and Roger just for a couple of minutes just to introduce themselves, which is, I think, always a little more personal than reading about them in your literature. But for me, I would start with a very simple message. If we have no education, we have no music. If we have no music, we have no life. So, Emily, introduce yourself, please.
Good something. Is it morning, afternoon, evening? One of the above. I'll take it from there. If we have no music, we have no education. Does anybody agree with me? Perhaps not. The question was, is music education for all a right or a privilege? I think it is the right privilege. And that's the way I'd like to use those two words, because I'm a very privileged person. Came from this family where my surrounding had a lot of music, and we started it off at church. If you're familiar with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you know there's a lot of singing there. And then I went to a primary school where there was a school choir, and from the age of 10, I was privileged to be a member of that choir, which means that when I got to secondary school, I had almost direct access to the choir. And then I was fortunate to meet teachers in high school who thought I could. And I think this is where the value of the teacher and the teacher's perception of the child's ability really come to play. And since they thought I could, they persuaded my parents to allow me to pick music and go on with it. And where I am today, I really believe that music, being the right privilege, should be made available to anybody who so desires to pursue it to whatever extent, simply because there is so much that we can do with music, and there are different levels of participation in music, and we need to have the skills to be able to participate at those levels. I think I've talked a lot already.
Roger?
Well, naturally, I completely agree. I grew up in the university town of St Andrews on the east coast of Scotland, and my parents enrolled me in the local church choir, where I learned to read music and sing in time from about the age of 7. And that training has been invaluable to me throughout my life. So that's why my enthusiasm is really there to see music education brought to the front of the discussion between governments and education authorities. I'm sure we all here agree that music is very important to a child's development, to their emotional well-being then, and also to their skills development. Because the lessons that we learnt in choirs were truly superb. You get teamwork, you get precision, the need for discipline, even turning up on time for a rehearsal for a young kid can be quite an experience. But performing, practicing, improving your brain function, there's an enormous amount of research about this. It's very well known. And of course you get a good musical training as well. And I think for a child to appreciate excellence and perfection at a very early age, because you know what the sound could be like if you do it really well. That feeling of excellence is really good to inculcate, to bring into a child's mentality. In some ways, I think excellence is the only real yardstick we should be looking for when we're thinking about music, but we can interpret that in many different ways. That's how I came to it.
Right. And I know from my own experience, having access to playing a brass instrument at age 7, because my parents belonged to the Salvation Army. So you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So I was given a brass instrument and I played it, but so did all my pals. I wasn't the weird one with the instrument. I was in the group, in the pack, and we all played. So when I went to secondary school, when you were offered instrumental teaching, I was already quite a good player. And it's a good feeling to be, it sounds awful to say the best, but one of the best. And what we don't want to see, as we've just heard from our panel, average is not good. Excellent is great. And when you're allowed and encouraged to be the very best you can be, it's a great feeling. And we shouldn't dumb that feeling down. Everyone, of course, should participate in all education, but particularly in music education. But to be the best and to be competitive is okay. But what is even better is taking part and having that opportunity. And I think we have all had that opportunity. We've gone different ways, but possibly. Roger works a lot here in Sweden with Seb, and Emily now is teaching music. It's difficult to find sometimes what I do, but I started life as a professional musician, and I still think and act as a musician first, and then a manager, administrator, whatever else I do, second. So that has led me to do what I do now, and I couldn't do it without that life experience that came free of charge. No fees had to be paid. And we've been talking about this. Should music education be free at the point of delivery? And if it's not, should we ignore it? I think, Roger, that's something that we were talking about before we came in. It's a very important point.
It's a conundrum, because every politician in the world acknowledges the importance of music education. Society knows it to be true. They know about all the research that music does for the development of the brain and the personality. And yet, you can't measure the value, the investment in music education on a balance sheet in the same way that you can measure chemistry or maths. Because 20 years later you see extra chemists or extra scientists coming into society. Music education is much harder, so it takes an extra leap of faith, if you like, or at least it needs somebody to understand the creative process and why music is so important for creativity. There was a lovely quotation which we've been talking a lot about Churchill in Great Britain recently, because there's other things happening in Great Britain which you may or may not have heard about. But there's a lovely quote attributed to Churchill when it was suggested to him during the Second World War that there should be cuts to the arts funding to help the war effort. And his reply was, well, if we cut the arts, what are we fighting for? And it's a lovely quote. I'm afraid it's almost certainly apocryphal.
I don't know
it's almost certainly apocryphal, but it puts the essence of the belief in society, the belief in what we're trying to create around civilization at the forefront, rather than saying, it'll just happen anyway, it's nice to have. And that's why I think it's a very difficult discussion, but one we must keep on trying it with government.
Yes, Emily?
That bit about it will happen. I come from this part of the world where things don't happen, they're done. And that is really important for us. I work in a technical university where the emphasis is supposed to be the engineering sciences and the applied sciences. And so as the real sciences, we are kind of on the periphery. But again, coupled with that is government's desire to industrialize by a certain date. And for that, we need technology, etc., etc. So a lot of funding goes into these other subjects other than music. And then what it brings to mind, therefore, is the question of what would music education be? When we talk of funding music education, what is music education?
Yeah.
What do we want this individual to be able to do or to be at the end of that education? We have had a Minister for Higher Education who made it very plain that in his thinking, higher education had no room for the arts. And yet, when he goes into functions, when he goes into activities, did I say that in Africa nothing important happens without music? I didn't, now I just did. When he goes to those important functions, the first thing that happens is an array of entertainment and a lot of music. And something sometimes tells me that I should ask him, Your Excellency, where should that entertainment come from if it is not going to be taught to people in high school? Because if we want the best, we have to make sure that we give the best, we develop the best, and therefore the excellence needs to be there. But the way to have that excellence is ensure that whoever is going through school is able to participate in that music making.
Also as well, I think it's important that there is a reward mechanism, not necessarily a piece of paper or a cup, but something that says to that young person, that child, that adult who is accessing music education late in life, you have done well. You have done really, really well. And that feeling of self-confidence is what music and the arts, across all of the arts, can give us. I have experience of music as a communication tool. You hear many words from platforms like this about the power of music. We don't need to convince you of that power, but the language of music has no barriers. And when you see music in its purest acoustic form used as a communication tool, particularly as you'll hear in a later panel with people with dementia, with children with autism who cannot communicate with words or with pictures. I once was privileged to watch a session with a very fine jazz pianist who was a therapist for Nordhoff Robbins, working with a little boy, 7 years old, who had never uttered one sound. Those of you in the room who are parents, or like me, grandparents, you know how precious the communication with your child is. Not one sound. And every session with the children is filmed, because sometimes the breakthroughs come unexpectedly. And here is this therapist, Brian, playing to this little boy who is sitting at the end of the piano, playing a little percussion instrument, but no communication. And Brian thought, I will sing to him. Instead of speaking and playing, I will sing. And this went on for some weeks, some months. Every lesson he sang to Louis. And this one lesson, all of a sudden, this perfect little soprano voice sang back to Brian.
Yeah.
Perfect vowel sounds, perfect diction. The door, the barrier was open, and music was the key. So, how precious, how privileged we all are. Roger, I'd like you to speak a little more about the perspective of the business world and engagement with music, and often looking at those gaps, sometimes along the road, where musicians are demonstrating their skills, but don't yet have the ability to understand what they need to have to survive in our industry.
I think the other business aspect to this is that the creative industries as a sector, certainly for Sweden and certainly for the UK, are so important. I think after financial services and manufacturing, at least in the UK, the creative industries collectively is the third largest area of exports and GDP. So there's a direct link with education in arts training, including music, through to the creative industries. So that should not be forgotten. And I think that point should be made to every politician every time they say, why do you need arts education? But I think the point you're coming more to is the need for every musician also to have a business understanding. It's lovely to play an instrument. It's lovely to be an amateur musician. I'm an amateur musician and a banker on the side. But it's actually don't tell the bank that. But it's actually much more important that the professional musicians, as they're coming out of colleges, they're coming into the real world, that they understand the need to be businesslike as well. Because we all need money to live, and musicians are no different from anyone else in that respect. One of the organizations I work with a lot with my wife Claire in London is called the City Music Foundation, and it takes highly talented artists starting out in their careers and helps them to turn that talent into success by giving them professional development training and business mentors. And those business mentors come from the banks and other financial services companies in the City of London. The banks love it because their amateur musicians who are working there get involved with the musicians, and musicians love it because they get a real business training out of these people who are telling them how to run a balance sheet, how to look after their pension fund, how to negotiate with an agent, with a contract. Really tough things that every musician needs to know if they're going to be successful as they go forward. And I think the involvement of the corporate world in music could be so much more than it is. Corporates tend to think, well, we're about making something or doing something here. Musicians think, well, we're only about creativity. But actually, the connection between the two could be greatly enhanced. All businesses are really about creativity. And to see a musician's aspect on creativity alongside a musician learning more business is a great combination. So I would love to see there much more crossover between those two. And I think that would also help musicians become much more businesslike in what they're doing. They don't really get a lot of training for that when they're starting out in their careers. And that's what this particular foundation we're helping to run helps to do.
And so we are further developing the definition of music education.
Yes.
What is the content of that education? When I come out of school as a trained musician, I should be able to function out there in the business world and be a truly independent individual who can contribute to society and who can also I should be able to take care of myself as well.
Yes, I think it's really important. I've been part of, as chair of the board of the European Music Council, which is a European organization based in Bonn in Germany. I've been part of a consultative group of representatives of the European music industry. And our European Commissioner asked me at a meeting in Brussels just recently, what would you add, for example, to the school curriculum? Now, that's a very good question to ask someone like me. And I felt like saying, how long have you got? But my answer was very straightforward, and that is, I want to see copyright and intellectual property added to the secondary school curriculum in every school in Europe. Because then everyone will understand just the points Roger has raised. You can become a great musician. There's no point becoming a great musician if you earn no money. You're not going to last very long. And I once heard a colleague, a good friend of mine, who was principal of the Scottish Conservatoire of Music, John Wallace, who was at college with me in London. He, a trumpet player, me, a horn player. And a student said, could you define what is success? Very easy question. And John's answer was very easy. He said, well, I'm a trumpet player, you're a trumpet player. By playing the trumpet, teaching the trumpet, fixing the trumpet, polishing the trumpet, can you pay your rent? Can you pay your bills? And the young student said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's very simple. Can you pay your bills from playing the trumpet? If the answer is yes, you are successful. The measure of your success is hopefully the increasing gap that comes between what you need to earn and what you are actually earning. And I've always had that in my head when people are asking about the economic value of music. Because music has two clear values. It has the aesthetic value of excellence and quality, and it has the economic value. And that economic value applies to every young person who accesses music education. They are more numerate, they are more literate, they are better able to compete, they are better able to communicate, they are the better citizen. There's nothing wrong with that. So, Emily, your experience in such a huge continent like Africa, where we're not going to talk about politics because we don't have time. We have 8 minutes and 52, 51, 50. So
Yes.
how do you think music and people who think more creatively can deal with sometimes a very challenging political agenda because of those opportunities, just like you have had through education?
There's this continuum of the traditional concept of music and the role of music and the role of the musician that we are holding on to very dearly. It is known, and you'll find it in several research papers, that it is only the musician who could tell off the chief, and the chief was that paramount administrative figurehead, and get away with it. Anybody else who dared critique or criticize found themselves absent, if you can find yourself absent for that matter. And then moving on to a different format of administration where there are rules and regulations, what you must do and what you must not do, but especially how you must behave and how you must relate to other people. The role of music continues to be there, simply in cementing the identities of the people, in cementing relationships, in creating cohesion amongst people, but the communication role. And music and the musician have traditionally been the repositories of the society's history, the knowledge of the people, the knowledge that is cultural, the knowledge that defines a particular community has been embedded in the music. And today, that is something we want to maintain. But it's a totally different economy. There are totally different ways of behaving, different ways of relating that do not always make that possible. And so when I get up and sing this song that is critical of the authorities, then I will find myself censored, I will find myself locked up. So how do we deal with it? Does it then mean that the musician must toe the political line, and that would then kill creativity? Because as a musician, you're going to be singing about what you have inside of you. You can never quite give what you don't have. And through my music, I will be presenting my worldview. I will be commenting on the situation around me. So how do the musicians and how do the music educators survive? They do just what they need to do. And they continue being locked up. And they continue doing what they know. Because the musician is traditionally the society's mouthpiece. Yeah. And therefore, what is the role of education? Yeah. And education is not going to be successful. Music education will not be successful if it encourages or if it inhibits expression, if it inhibits analysis. As a musician, you're always analyzing things around you. You are always perceptive, and then you express that. So the music educator, the music researcher continues to talk about these things. And the joy of it is that when the musician presents these thoughts aesthetically, they're a little easier to absorb. They're slightly less abrasive.
Yeah. I think as well, we've seen the terrible situation out there in our Europe and in the last 2 days in Orlando, in Florida. We've seen what has happened in Istanbul, in Paris, in Brussels, very close to us. So Europe isn't as free either as we think it once was. And we see this movement of people from east to west. And from the European Music Council perspective, we made a very strong statement from Budapest last October at WOMEX about the cultural identity of migrants coming here. Sweden has a very honorable history. Rami Ehsan was here last year. Many of you will remember his story, talking about his situation in Egypt. And now Sweden has given him a home and a place from which he has a voice again. And I think it's so important that we understand that the voice of music often is seen by others. Those who would dictate to us their politics is seen as a threat rather than the communication tool and language we all love. The clock is ticking down, and I want to give my two guests and colleagues the opportunity to make 1-2 final points, which can be as challenging as they would like them to be, because we agreed this before we came in. Roger, would you like to go first?
Yes, okay. Well, I mean, I think what we're talking about, education as a right, yes, I absolutely agree, and I would love it to be completely government-funded, or government to be in the space where they said that music is as important as maths or chemistry or a second language, and it's on part of the main curriculum. I would love that. But I don't think it's going to happen immediately. So while we must strive for that, I think there's a great opportunity that musicians have to engage with business more. And I think not only because musicians need to be business-minded, they need to be talented, but they also need to be successful. And I think partnerships with business people can be explored much more than they have been. I would like to see much more interaction between companies and artists. I'd like to see you going to companies and saying, let me come and play in your canteen at lunchtime. Let me engage with some of the people. Let's meet some of the amateur musicians who are working in that company, to work with them to see whether there's some ideas we can have together. I think that could be very fruitful on both sides, and you might find more corporate participation in the arts projects that are happening. I'd also like to change our language, which we in the music industry, or on the side of the music industry in the United Kingdom also use. We talk about support, we talk about partnership, we talk about sponsorship. I'd like to change that to investment. Because I think if we can have businesses investing in the arts, investing in artists, investing in new music, even if the returns are uncertain or they're not within a certain time limit, or a formal agreement for where businesses invest in the arts and invest in artists, I'd like to see that language used much more, because I think it'll be much more fruitful over time, even if there isn't a formal agreement around it. So the challenge would be engage with the people that you know in companies, go and talk to them, go and see whether you can't do something for them on a collaborative basis, because I think that could be very fruitful. Thank you.
Threaten to move your bank account to another bank. There you are. Thank you, Roger. Emily.
Thank you. Very quickly, from the classroom perspective, just to start by agreeing on what music education should be.
Yeah.
And I think it should really be tooling an individual to participate in music in a manner that will be useful to them, that will be beneficial to them, whether they're listening and gaining meaning in the presence of music, or whether they're actually making music and walking to the bank after making that music. And I want to acknowledge the input globally. UNESCO's, what is it called? UNESCO's
Convention on Human Rights.
That one? And there's something else. Oh my goodness. Say that again.
Cultural identity.
The Seoul Agenda, yes, on arts education.
Hello, Celia.
Is beautiful. Thank you, Celia and Jesse. That is beautifully worded. And then there's the International Network for Research in Arts Education, INRE, that is now trying to monitor the implementation of that Seoul Agenda. And if the rest of us then picked it up from there at our different levels and came to the classroom and outside of the classroom, the place where the young person is, and we gave them that opportunity to participate in music, we will be doing the right thing. We will be making music education the right privilege.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Well, we are now 25, 26, 27 seconds over time. There is no extra payment for us, but there is only coffee for you. So let's remember, there are no silos. There is only great music. And for great music, we need great musicians. So let's teach them all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.